Now, so what I found from this is you can't really trust what you're seeing unless you check it out for yourself. And when I checked this out, I found that the article that was being used to prove lunar Sabbaths actually proves the opposite. And this was just one of the theories that was promoted, is that the Jews adopted the Sabbath from the Babylonians who kept their weeks according to the moon. And I found this was just bogus. It's not what the article was saying at all, and that's what the article was saying, is this is not factual. It lacks all foundation, and there was no connection with the Jewish Sabbath to the moon. So this was one quote that I found used to promote lunar Sabbaths from history. And then there was another one that came from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and this really got me questioning, because the Jews ought to know where the Sabbath came from, and they ought to be able to speak authoritatively on this subject. So I'd like to read this next quote from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and it says, "The idea of the week as a subdivision of the month seems to have arisen in Babylonia, where each lunar month was divided into 4 parts, corresponding to the 4 phases of the moon. The first week of each month began with the new moon, so that as the lunar month was 1 or 2 days more than 4 periods of 7 days, these additional days were not reckoned at all. Every 7th day, Sabbatum, was regarded as an unlucky day. This method of reckoning time spread westward through Syria and Palestine and was adopted by the Israelites probably after they settled in Palestine. With the development of the importance of the Sabbath as a day of consecration and the emphasis laid upon the significant number 7, the week became more and more divorced from its lunar connection." That's from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia, Volume 10, 1943, Article Week, page 482. So this again caused me to wonder. Now the Jews themselves are telling me that the Sabbath used to be connected with the moon, and that it became divorced from its lunar connection. But there was one thing in that article, in that quote, that caused me to wonder, caused me to be puzzled, because right in that quote it said that, we'll look back at this quote right at the beginning. It says, "The idea of the week as a subdivision of the month," going on there, it says that the idea of the week seems to have arisen in Babylonia. Well, automatically we know there's something wrong here, because the week came from creation. Back when God created the world in 6 days and rested on the 7th. That's where the week came from. But here this encyclopedia said that it came from Babylonia. So there's really a problem here. In fact, it says that the Jews adopted it probably after they settled in Palestine. They adopted this from the Babylonians. Now, does this make sense? That the Jews would have adopted the Sabbath from the pagans? That's not where they got it. We know that's not true. We know that the Jews got the Sabbath from God, way back in creation. So here this Jewish encyclopedia is telling me something that I know is not true. We know that the Jews did not adopt the Sabbath from the pagans. So how can I trust when he says that originally it was connected with the moon? If it's outright lying right at the beginning, how can I trust what's said next? So this caused me to wonder, and it made me check things out a little more detailed. I found another quote. This is also from the Jewish Encyclopedia, and this says, "The new moon is still, and the Sabbath originally was, dependent upon the lunar cycle." So this is another thing that really got me concerned, or got me interested. But what I found, the article author was Max Joseph. And I found in another article, he said that the origin of the Sabbath is uncertain. Let me quote exactly from this. He says, "The origin of the Sabbath is obscure." So that's Max Joseph, the same author that says it came from the moon. He says, "I don't really know where it came from." And this is very similar to another quote in the Jewish Encyclopedia that says, "The origin of the Sabbath, as well as the true meaning of the name, is uncertain." Now that's strange coming from the Jews. They ought to know where the Sabbath came from. It should be certain. It's right in the Bible. It tells you where the Sabbath came from. And then it says, it was probably originally connected in some manner with the cult of the moon. Now notice this word probably. That should throw a question mark up in your mind, a red flag. Probably. They don't even know what they're talking about here. But they say it probably was connected originally with the moon. Well, we know where the Sabbath originally came from. It came from God in creation in Genesis 1. And it goes on, as indeed is suggested by the frequent mention of the Sabbath and new moon festivals in the same sentence. The Sabbath depending in Israel's nomadic period upon the observation of the phases of the moon. It could not, according to this view, be a fixed day. When the Israelites settled in the land and became farmers, their new life would have made it desirable that the Sabbath should come at regular intervals, and the desired change would have been made all the more easily as they had abandoned the lunar religion. That's coming from the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia article is the Sabbath. So here it says again that the Jews adopted this ritual of 7-day week from the pagans. When they were worshiping the moon, they were keeping the Sabbath according to the moon. But since they rejected worshiping the moon, that's when they divorced it from the lunar connection. But how could I trust anything this Jewish encyclopedia is saying when it's blatantly lying in certain areas, and it says that they don't even know where the Sabbath came from? Well, I seem to find clearly in the Bible that the Sabbath came from Genesis chapter 1, when God created the world. So far, these were the strongest statements that I found to prove that the Sabbath, the Jewish Sabbath, originally was connected to the moon, and I found both of these quotes were bogus, both from the Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia and the Universal Jewish Encyclopedia. So it really caused me to question when I see a quote from history. I want to check this out, because I can't really just take what is said at face value without knowing for myself if this is true, reading the context, checking everything out for myself. And I pray that you will do the same thing. I'd like to look at some more quotes that are very interesting. I found a quote in the Anchor Bible Dictionary that is very interesting. It says, beginning in 1905, J. Meinhold argued that the Old Testament Sabbath was originally a monthly full moon day, and as such was borrowed by Israel from ancient Babylon. His hypothesis has found sporadic support. And you notice even in Jewish Encyclopedia it has found support. But then he says there is no compelling evidence in the Old Testament for an alleged transfer from a pre-exilic monthly Sabbath to an exilic or post-exilic weekly Sabbath. That's the Anchor Bible Dictionary article, The Sabbath. So here we find that this man J. Meinhold in 1905 came up with this theory, this hypothesis about the Sabbath originating from the moon, and then others have taken up this idea and have written different articles. It's in the Jewish Encyclopedia. The Schaff-Herzog Encyclopedia mentioned it. So we found there is no support for this. It's just a hypothesis that this man, J. Meinhold, came up with, and now people are following it as if it were fact. And because they find it in an encyclopedia, they think it must be true. But just check it out for yourself. Now let's look at another quote. This comes from the New Encyclopedia Britannica article, The Week. And it says, the week is a period of 7 days, a unit of time artificially devised with no astronomical basis. By the 1st century BC, the Jewish 7-day week seems to have been adopted throughout the Roman world, and this influenced Christendom. Now notice here it says that by the 1st century BC, that's before Christ, the Jewish 7-day week had been adopted throughout the Roman world. So the change from a 7-day week or a lunar week to a continual 7-day cycle, there's no record of any change. There's no record in history that this change has ever taken place. And there has been, it's true there was a change in the Roman calendar. They used to have an 8-day week, and I'd like to look at that in just a moment. But first of all, I want to read about a visionary. This is in the Jewish calendars